If your first experience of watching Star Wars was in numerical order, you probably didn't ask this question. But if you were a fan before the prequels came out, chances are you may have been one of the many who puzzled, what was Lucas thinking having a whole movie of Anakin as a kid? We want dark, not dork. So, is there a rhyme and reason to Anakin's age in Episode 1? Like he's always done, Lucas subverted many expectations with Episode 1. Yeah, he understood the market expectations, but ultimately decided it worked best to begin his Star Wars saga with a young, cherub-like Anakin living as a slave with his mother. Some longtime fans were taken aback by this, and so today we'll try exploring the reasons Lucas went this direction and see if it all fits into the overarching story of the prequels in a more compelling way. And if it continues to enhance Anakin's character all the way through to the end of the saga. So, let's have a look.
And he'll always be that little boy I knew on Tatooine.
Ever the anthropologist, when making the prequels, George Lucas wanted to explore two major intertwining themes that have recurred throughout history and are still relevant today.
All I need is an idea.
What causes republics to become dictatorships? And what causes some people who start out as regular children to grow up to be evil? And what does Padme's line from Episode 2 have to do with this? Well, let's begin unpeeling the layers by starting from the end of the Lucas saga and working back. At the end of Return of the Jedi, Anakin saves his son's life by sacrificing his own to destroy the Emperor, and in doing so helps restore the galaxy's freedom and balance to the Force. Up until that point in the original trilogy, he's only been a ruthless warlord. So, where did the lost bit of good dwelling inside this otherwise evil villain come from? He couldn't have always been a ruthless warlord, could he? What kind of person was this Knight of Darkness before he was Darth Vader? And what was it that got him to go down the dark path? Well, in the interest of crafting a consistent character arc, and in rhyming motifs, his fall should mirror his redemption. We all know he becomes Vader. What's interesting is how, and not only that, what mistakes from his fall does he learn from in his redemption? Well, like father, like son, right? Even without the prequels, we could likely answer these questions by simply looking at Luke's motivations and temptations. First, Luke was lured into Vader's trap in an effort to save his loved ones. And again, in Return of the Jedi, Luke flew into a furious rage and came to the brink of the dark side to save his sister, Leia. So, what snapped Luke out of his slippery slide towards the dark side? When he looked at his father's missing hand and then his own, he realized how similar the two of them were, and that his father must have been turned in the same way he almost was. And at that moment, Luke couldn't help but feel compassion for his father, knowing the poor guy must have been lured to the dark side in an effort to save his loved ones, probably even Luke's mother. And yes, naturally, just as Anakin's redemption was brought about through the connection he had with his son, the love for his family, Anakin's temptations should be no different from Luke's, meaning the problems that contributed to Anakin's fall needed to center around the loving connection he has with his family. And yes, naturally, this is just how it turns out, and the primary factor contributing to his turn was trying but failing to save his wife, which all started with wanting but being unable to save his mother. But through all of this, after all Anakin had done, by the time of their last meeting, Padme still believed that deep down, Anakin was a good person. Why? Because despite his flaws and underneath all of his crimes of passion, she knows he ultimately has a good heart. Because she knew him, who he could really be. Because she remembers when he was a brave, selfless, and heroic little boy. And that part of him isn't gone for good. Like Qui-Gon before her, she has faith in him to be the best he can be.
I will.
She knew that good-natured little boy on Tatooine with the selfless drive to help others. But we all know Anakin has to start down the dark path somehow.
Tell us now!
So how does Lucas have this good person go bad?
Tell us now!
Primarily, it's crucial that Anakin have an understandable reason to act on his negative emotions, and thus tap into the dark side. It was important for Lucas that the themes central to Anakin's trials and struggles that contributed to his turn were the big issues of life that we all struggle with and relate to, and therefore should focus on universal things like fear of loss and reluctance to accept change.
What about Mom?
As he says,
Anakin's flaws, like all classic mythological heroes, are the flaws that everyone carries with them.
and what bigger loss is there than losing your loved ones, or leaving them before you're ready, or in Anakin's case,
I can't do it.
both?
I just can't do it.
Okay, fair enough, you're thinking, but he could still be a teenager in episode 1, right? Some think episode 1 should have featured a teenage or early 20s Anakin, and even Lucas originally had Anakin at around 12 years old. In fact, while writing the screenplay, he went back and forth between different ages until he eventually moved his age down to around 9 or 10. Because, as he simply says, he felt it worked better. Because he realized the issue of leaving his mother wasn't quite as dramatic as it needed to be. So, why wasn't it exactly? The obvious answer is in the dramatic tension in his reluctance to answer the call to adventure, the first phase in the classic hero's journey. Good drama needs something which holds the hero back. And like all great stories, the thing holding Anakin back is also what drives the rest of the story of how he falls and how he's redeemed. To quote George from the Making of Episode 1 book, the problem was that a 12-year-old leaving his mother, as Anakin does, is not nearly as traumatic as a 9-year-old leaving his mother. And there's a key story point that revolves around the fact that he was separated from his mother at an early age and how that has affected him. Therefore, George also thought it was important that Anakin leave his mother at an age where that abrupt change would be a difficult challenge to overcome. That severing of the mother-child attachment at an age when one is dependent on one's caregiver. An innocent form of attachment to one's parents, particularly the mother, is natural and necessary for young children. Not so much for teenagers, as they're beginning to become more interdependent and then eventually independent. So, to leave one's parents in their teens would not be as big a deal. Psychologist Daniel Goleman, an associate of Lucas's in the field of reforming the education system, wrote the landmark book Emotional Intelligence, which Lucas was reading while writing The Phantom Menace. The book states, through the research of countless child psychologists, that the ages in which the trauma of losing a parent, leaving a parent, or divorce has the biggest effect is 6 through 12.
Don't you get it, Dad? I want it to be the same. I want you to come home.
This is a precarious time when children begin to understand the implications of death and separation, but still have not yet begun to step into a place of personal independence and the emotional maturity with which to recognize and regulate one's emotions which arise from the situation. thus making a 9-year-old Anakin's decision to leave his mother and become a Jedi the most difficult for him to make. This natural stage of dependence during childhood was something Anakin never really grew out of, and thus at the same time he grew up too fast.
Don't try to grow up too fast.
Anakin joined an order which eschews attachments, but he refused to do that, thus stunting his potential to develop into an independent person. And he buried his fears and distracted himself from all these difficult emotions by pulling wild stunts and doubling down on his fascination with Padme. Okay, but if Anakin was 16 in episode 1, he could still miss his mom and be afraid to lose her.
She's my mom, I gotta help her.
And then in episode 2, at age 19, get angry when she dies and take revenge on the Tuskens. Possibly, but does he wipe out the entire Tusken camp? Underneath all anger is fear. Or, as Yoda said,
fear leads to anger.
As it is, Anakin had been harboring more fear as a youngster than he would have as a teenager.
Everything.
That night in the Tusken camp, while Anakin's mother died in his arms, all he could think about in that moment was how much he wanted to keep things the way they were, to possess the power to change what is. It's like the bargaining stage of grief. And then, unable to control his emotions, he acted on his anger and hate, which were the byproducts of his pent-up fears and frustrations, and slaughtering all those sand people, even the innocent ones, gave him enough of a surge in the dark side to trip out on the thought that he could actually learn to stop death, which is probably why he kept going, thinking he was almost there. If he just keeps going, he can have what he wants, which is all necessary story-wise, because now he knows the power surge he can get from slaughtering innocents. And it's why he believes Palpatine when he's ordered to do so in order to obtain the power necessary to learn how to save Padme. But enough dark stuff for now. This particular younger age also makes things like building a protocol droid, building a pod racer, flying a pod racer, and a starfighter all the more spectacular and unexpected accomplishments, while also feasible enough in making him out to be that much more of a young phenom or child prodigy, subverting expectations, yet still establishing Anakin as a great pilot with strong Force abilities, which are integral to the plot and his character development. So, in being old enough to win a pod race, yet young enough to be traumatized by leaving his mother, I think Lucas hit a sweet spot with Anakin's age of 9 to 10. Yippies and all.
Yippee!
And while being a slave is tragic enough for anybody, it's even more so for a kid. Furthermore, we see that despite his adverse conditions, he is still a relatively happy child. And most importantly, it's because of his relationship to his mother, his loving, nurturing foundation in an unpredictable environment. It also makes it that much harder to believe this kind-hearted boy will eventually become Darth Vader. This image is loaded with foreshadowing, but in an almost mind-bendingly incredulous way. Replace Annie with a teenager, and that sense of curious anticipation deflates quite a bit. A younger, more innocent Anakin makes that yearning question of how really pop. At this age, he's also much more compelled to seek out a father figure, as he did in Qui-Gon. And with Anakin as a young child really brings out Qui-Gon's warmth. He subsequently also sought out a father figure in Obi-Wan, and unfortunately in Palpatine.
Your guidance more than my patience.
Now, to address the bantha in the room, The age issue between Padme and Anakin. I feel this is a bold move. It's unexpected and sets up more anticipation for the next films. But most importantly, I believe when we see the two of them develop a bond together in episode 1, it shows for certain that they develop an authentic bond of caring for each other as people, without any influence of hormones or anything. For example, when Padme comforts him on the ship and he gives her the Chapor snippet, that's just pure kindness. Moments like these emphasize the compassion brought out in these two characters for one another, and therefore their bond is established and grounded in genuine, mutual caring. Even Anakin's fascination with her and her beauty is grounded in boyish innocence.
I heard the deep space pilots.
And later, Anakin being younger also sets up an obstacle and a challenge for him to have to prove himself to Padme. This way, we see that she doesn't just fall for him because of his looks or something superficial. He had to really impress her with his character.
I don't like sand.
The age gap, the fact that she's older, along with their societal roles, also shows that Padme's feelings for him are so strong that she is willing to stay true to her heart rather than follow societal norms and rules.
I'll go with you.
This scenario is also so much less cliché. Personally, I loved the anticipation after The Phantom Menace, wondering how this was gonna work out. That sense of taboo we get from The Phantom Menace also works as a nice setup for the actual taboo of them being in a relationship when they do later come of age.
I don't care if they know we're married.
And going back to Anakin's 10 years as a Padawan, 10 years of dwelling on Padme is a very long time, which is the point. The prolonged time span really makes his obsession hit home. A few years or so doesn't raise the viewer's eyebrows quite the same. This is also a long time for him to go without seeing or hearing from his beloved mother, which creates a lot of inner problems for him which fester, only to come exploding out in Attack of the Clones. Being away from her for a few years as a teen isn't nearly as impactful as being away from her for a decade as a child. Now, some of you are saying, this is all fine and dandy, but couldn't it have been done in flashbacks? Simply, no. That's not Lucas's style, and I think it would be a disservice to the story and the films and to the overarching saga as a whole. We need to see and experience firsthand the kind of person he is, and therefore the kind of person he's capable of returning to. One must also realize how important Lucas's children are to him. He says our children redeem us, they teach us compassion, and they should bring out the best in us. He says the most important thing you can do is raise children. He makes his movies to instill morals and imagination into the young generations, so they can decide for themselves what kind of adults they want to become. So, why not make the main character of this saga that is so centered around kids, a kid? And just admire the contrast in Anakin's theme to Vader's Imperial March. A theme written for 12-year-old Anakin or older just wouldn't be dramatic enough of a juxtaposition. And I like Jake Lloyd's natural approach to acting. He delivers his lines like an actual child, not a child actor. He brings an authentic sincerity to his performances. He comes across as a normal, likable kid to me. It's a joy to see.
You catch on pretty quick.
The exuberant, sunny youthfulness of little Anakin and the Phantom Menace in general serves as the contrast to the dark tragedy of Darth Vader and the dark times of the Empire. We, the viewers, are given the full ride as the galaxy is drained of color, life, friendship, joy, and love. Heck, the young, innocent Anakin stands in stark contrast to Darth Maul, who is meant to represent primal fear. It's no coincidence that literally minutes after leaving his mother, Darth Maul launches an attack upon Anakin and Qui-Gon, strongly emphasizing the thrusting of Anakin into a new, more uncertain world. Episodes 2 and 3 are cautionary tales of what not to do, but Episode 1 inspires us to be wise and independent like Qui-Gon, brave and resourceful like Padme, pure and authentic like Jar Jar, and selfless like Annie.
Universes, nobody helps each other.
Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith aren't always kid-friendly. And with Star Wars being kids' movies, why can't there be one episode where the main characters are actually kids? All in all, the young viewers relate to Annie as well as to Padme, and even Jar Jar. A young Anakin helped to bring in a new generation of fans and inspired them to be brave and overcome their adversaries and challenges by using their intelligence and through helping each other.
He can help you.
Perhaps there's also something to be said about retaining a sense of childlike wonder as we traverse through our lives. Lucas often talks about how children teach us compassion and unconditional love, and that if we treated everybody the way we treat our young children, we'd all be a lot happier. And perhaps we can learn something of this from Episode 1, even if it's only in the way we treat the characters of Little Annie, and even Jar Jar for that matter, especially the actors who played them. When I see people complain that Episode 1 is too kiddie, I feel they're blocking themselves from considering that it's a great children's film in a lot of ways, as well as missing the appreciation in how it contrasts with the dark and tragic Episode 3 so effectively, as we see the innocence and warmth fade from the galaxy, only to see it return in Episode 6. I was a kid during the original trilogy days, and was pleasantly surprised, enchanted, and deeply moved by the story we were given when The Phantom Menace came out when I was in my early 20s. I loved how Anakin was a kid. It took me back to my childhood as a Star Wars loving kid wanting to be a Jedi. I believe The Phantom Menace was supposed to hearken adult viewers back to the wonderment of when they were innocent, wide-eyed Star Wars loving kids. Instead, it triggered their pouty, entitled man-child side. For me, it enhanced my childhood. I don't get why some say it ruined theirs.
Your focus determines your reality.
I may have had some half-baked pet theories prior to 1999, but I didn't cement myself into my own headcanon. I was open to whatever Lucas thought was best for his story, and I think it works. Thanks so much for watching, and karate chop that subscribe button.
Don't give up on me either, okay?